Managing Director of the Monash European Media Centre, and it is my great pleasure to welcome somebody who's already been a guest of the Centre, His Excellency Mr Patrick Renault of the Belgian Embassy in Canberra, who is going to talk to us about what everybody's interested in at the moment, which is the crisis in Europe. For short, the Euro crisis, or as my students were told this morning, the European crisis of sovereign debt. So His Excellency will speak for about 20 minutes, right? And then we'll take questions from the floor. So please join me in welcoming His Excellency.
There we go, 1, 2, 3, yes. Now put that on the side, so I'll try to be more or less precise. So as a Belgian ambassador, what else would I take with me to confront you but Tintin, so we'll keep this one with me. Well, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, it's as always a pleasure and privilege being here with you. I salute some friends and some students I had the pleasure of meeting a few months ago in the same university. So I'll try, and please shoot at me if I start doing it. I'll try not to repeat myself too much and to submit you to a second ordeal of the magnitude you had last time. So I mean, once again, thank you very much. The subject of today's lecture, if I may say so, is extremely broad. It's a bit if I was talking about the origins at the end of the world in 15 minutes. It's going to be a bit too tough, but as the professor said, I mean, we'll try to focus on the present situation and or the reading of what might have happened and what might happen in the future vis-à-vis the debt crisis, because as you said, I mean, I think it's improperly referred to as a Euro crisis, actually. In a nutshell, I'm not going to bore you to death with the history of Europe, but remind you that what is absolutely was and is central to Europe is the stability and the peace on the continent. And that's something which has been quite often overlooked. I'm not going to go back to history, but to be quite honest, this idea of creating something economic in the late 50s was absolutely extraordinary and groundbreaking, because we were just 10 years after the Second World War, which saw something like 50 million Europeans killed one way or another. And it took the foresight of a few Europeans to decide that instead of continuing every second generation of sort of, destroying each other, we could try to do something together. And instead of choosing some kind of grand declaration, political declaration, they thought about how best could we avoid war. And the answer was in putting in common what is used to make war. 1957, 1956, creation of the community of steel and coal. Steel and coal are absolutely vital to make war. If you don't have the one or the other, you simply cannot do it. And that started like that. We want to put in common what has been used for war and make war impossible, because we are going to integrate first heavy industry and then on and on for the next 30 years, put in common what we live about. And it is, we started about business, and then we had some kind of political structure. It is obvious that from day one, and even today, I'd like to stress that one, the European project is not only an economic project, it's an economic project but motivated by political reasons. We put in common our economy and we integrate it further and further. We were the first integrators, let's put it that way, with much long, say 40 years before this idea of globalization, we had some kind of local globalization. We started with 6 countries, then 9, 12, 15, we now 27, and soon to be 28 with Croatia joining in a few months. And we started asking ourselves on the economic field, how best could we integrate our economies and facilitate the trade between our countries and our businesses. And that was the idea of the the unicity of the market. So put everyone on an equal footing to compete on a single market. What are the restrictions for a market? And well, there are multiple, of course. Taxes. It's also, technical restrictions. And it's also fiscal and finances. And we addressed the one after the other. The first one was taxes. We did get away progressively of internal taxes, and it was in the 80s. The second thing was everything that is technical. To give you an idea, if you buy, for example, a motorbike in Hong Kong, and you bring it, say, in America, it's exactly the same motorbike at 99.99%, but you have one or two pieces which are different. Say, for example, one headlamp, or just a sticker somewhere. And to change the sticker, it costs you $500. Just to change the stickers. This is what we call impediment to free trade. So we get away with that. And we started creating common structure and common standards on a bit of everything and much too much, actually. And the machine went a bit crazy, to be honest, in the late 80s, where we ended up having legalization about bananas. I kid you not. And how thick they had to be, and they had to be that shape and so on and so forth. That was complete madness. We ended up with 30,000 pages of legislation issued every year by the European Union, or at that time, the Commission of the Communities. So we decided then that we would leave what is not absolutely vital or important to the nation states or to other levels of government. That's what we call subsidiarity, saying the European Union is not going to take care about the thickness of bananas or meatballs or whatever, but will take care of things which are more important, like health and like free access to the markets, internal markets. The last impediment for the internal market, according to us, but some countries differ, was the currency. How can you have a real internal market, one single market, when you have different currencies, depending each of them of the state, and state using the currencies to wage economic and commercial wars. I would say crisis. For example, I was in Italy, alas, for a very short time, I can tell you, but I worked in Italy for 9 months, and I saw Belgian and Dutch trucks. This was pre-Euro. Belgian and Dutch trucks coming all the way from the north of Europe to Italy, it's 1,300 kilometers still, to buy Coca-Cola in Italy, because Italy just, downgraded this currency by 3 or 4 or 5% to make a boost for their exports. So they devaluated the lira by 3 to 5%, and that justified the trucks coming all the way from up north to buy Coca-Cola and sell it back with a profit back home. This is not the way you can run a modern economy. This is not doable. And on top of that, what we saw, everybody did the same, don't worry. Some kind of what we call competitive devaluation. Saying that Italians did that, then the Spanish did that a bit later, and then the Swedes and so on and so forth. So you try to get the value of the currency down and down to boost your exports. The only drawback with that is that it lasts a few weeks, a few days, because everything you import, of course, is more expensive immediately. And all our countries import heavily everything they need, actually, starting with petrol, gas, whatever. So, if you devaluate your currency by 10%, the next literally 7 minutes, you will have to pay your gas 10% higher. Because, the producers of gas, they couldn't care less if your money is devaluated or not. So the reason why we went to the idea of having some kind of common currency is really having a single access, a single market, and facilitating the single market, one. And secondly, and more importantly, if I may say, This was also, and it is it's also a political decision once again, and a political decision of integrating Europe further. That was at least the idea of, say, the majority of the continental Europe countries. Once again, I spare you, unless you wish, of course, but it took more or less 10 years to reach the idea of what we did call at that time le serpent monétaire, the monetary snake. Meaning by that it was an intergovernmental organization. So it was not a European Union treaty, but it was an international treaty between each and every country saying, well, I guarantee you that the French franc will go no more than 3% up the German mark, or no more than 3% down the German mark. Same thing for the lira, same thing for the drachma, and so on and so forth. So that was the idea. National policies, national banks who were in charge of doing that by themselves, but no fixed currency, let's put it that way. Britain was part of it, the UK was part of it. I'm talking about the late 80s here. And then we had a terrible day, I think it's called, still referred to as Black Friday, a terrible attack on the pound, very sudden attack. I think it was in 87, 88. And the pound devaluated widely. So the pound couldn't sustain that. And people didn't have the time to react. I mean, the governments didn't have the time to react. And the pound had to leave the system, causing the near collapse of what we call the European tunnel or the European snake. Snake because the snake goes like that, so you can fluctuate up and down more than 3%, the other currency. So it was as good as gone, basically. And that was a bit a turning point in the history of the euro, because we have been there, we've done that before. We have to go back a bit. It's not the first time Europe tries for a long time, having a common currency. Euro is not coming out of the blue, out of nowhere. We've had, of course, but that's going really far, the Roman sesterce, which was used in our continent for 700 years. More recently, in the 19th century, or Sweden and Denmark, the newcomers committed themselves legally to be part of the euro when the time is right. When will that be? I haven't a focused idea. Some of them joined already, like Slovenia, Slovakia, and Estonia, I think. And others will follow suit. But it's a commitment, and it's a legal and political commitment on their side. Fast forward to the economic crisis of 2007. Big problem for everyone. Huge turmoil worldwide, Europe being one of the hardest hit parts of the world by this crisis. Needless to give you details about that, you lived through that here in Australia or elsewhere, but it was extremely tough for everyone, and we've seen many major European banks collapsing, and the immediate danger of having a complete collapse of the financial system. Government stepped in many ways, in many different ways. I'll take a few. For example, big crisis in Ireland. We're talking about 400% of the GDP. The Irish banks, Ireland is and was a thriving economy. It is a country which most probably benefited the most from being part of the European Union, because they went from the bottom of the league to the top of the league in 15 years. In the 80s, Ireland was the poorest EU country. In 2007, they were the richest, bar Luxembourg. And it was a phenomenal, how should I say, progress. And this great progress was based upon a few elements: attraction of investment, of foreign investments, a real estate which went completely crazy, and banks who let like absolutely mad anything that could be built in Ireland. The result of that is that Ireland had 4 huge banks, which were, some of them, much bigger than the GDP of the whole country. What they decided was to, because, I mean, you might remember, in some countries, including Britain, you had a run on the banks, people were asking their money back and putting them in there, literally under their beds or whatever. And the banks couldn't fulfill that. So some banks went bankrupt, like in Ireland, like in Iceland, like in Belgium, Italy, France, Germany, everywhere, Britain, RBS. And each country tried to react the best they could. Ireland said, we are going to guarantee not only the deposits on the bank, what everybody did. Say, for example, you had $100,000 in a bank which has gone bankrupt, the state will pay you this $100,000. State or whoever, organization, but you are guaranteed that you will have at least 100,000 euros back. Ireland went even a step further in guaranteeing the bondholders of these banks. So you did invest in Anglo-Irish Bank or whatever, you were guaranteed to get some of your money back, which was not the case, it was not the case. Should you invest money in an Icelandic bank, you would have lost absolutely everything. Should you have invested in an Irish bank, you would get some of your money back, guaranteed by the government. But it was far above what Ireland could pay. And that's how, for Ireland, the European Union stepped in. Another example, or example if I may say, Greece, of course, in everybody's minds right now. Greece is a bit different. Greece has been, the Greek governments in the 70s and 80s have been beyond complacent. We all have been complacent, but these governments, some of them, if not all, went to fiddling with the figures. That's something all of us do very well, you know. Especially diplomats, we love fiddling with the figures, we pay for that. But then, they went one step above that because they really hid the sorry state of their economy, and especially the sorry state of their finances. And incidentally, they did that with some banks that you might have heard of. Lehman Brothers was the ones who lent them in their hands to fiddle with the figures and to hide the huge deficits they had pre-Euro and post-Euro. So it was really an active camouflage, if I may say, hiding the real situation. What they did with the money, which was readily available, and that's a consequence of the Euro, it has to be said, it is a direct consequence of the Euro. Because for the first time, and that's general in the south of Europe, we've always had this difference between north of Europe and south of Europe. South of Europe, for 100 years, you have had this devaluation after devaluation after devaluation, which means when you devaluate, you have a high interest rate, right? You get a lot of money and you have to pay a lot to get credit because you devaluate all the time. Northern Europe, more Protestant ethics, everything has to be right. So, less inflation and much cheaper rents. If you had to have, before, let's say, if we took pre-Euro in Greece, you would pay easily for a house, for a mortgage, you would pay easily 7, 8, 9%. Post-Euro, 3%. People went mad, and everybody went mad. The people went mad, the businesses went mad because it was so cheap. For them, it was the first ever they had access to such a cheap credit. And the government went mad on top of that. And because everything was 3 times cheaper than it was a few months ago, as far as interest rates were concerned. So they overspent, they overborrowed, to be very honest, I've been very jealous for the last 10 years because my colleagues were paid not 12 months a year, but 14 months a year. So that was nice, that was good times. So it was a redistribution, but a very crazy one. It's due to the fact that the credit was so cheap. It's really, that's really one of the causes of the Greek collapse, was that the economy, everybody went mad about that. And then the reality crashed down on them, was that when they had to refinance the debt, the interest rates went up and up to 7% with the same currency. So don't forget, in Germany, we're talking 2.5%. Pre-2007 in Greece, we're talking about 3.5%, 4%. It was a discrepancy. 4, 7, 10, 12, 14, 19% at one point. What caused that? As I told you, profligacy and the fact that it was so cheap that people overborrowed. It is said that the Greeks are responsible of what's happening right now. It is not partly true and partly wrong. It is true that the government fiddled with figures. It's true that the government overspent. But on the other hand, pre-2007, Greece had the fastest growing economy in Europe. Greece had a deficit of a minimum, I think it's 1.2%. Pre-2007, the average deficit in Europe, yearly deficit, 0.5% of the GDP. It's minimum, it's minuscule. And of course, everybody had to finance that. In my country, for example, we had to borrow more than 30 billion euros or $40 billion for a country of 10 million to sustain our banking sector and guarantee the banks. It was out of reach for Greece. And so the Greece had to refinance that. And one says that when, at least for European standards, when you go above 7% of the interest rate, it's not sustainable. A country cannot afford that. And Greece went beyond that. What did we do? What did we, meaning the Europeans, we did good and bad things. We didn't take that seriously at the beginning, to be honest. Being once again complacent, saying, oh, well, Greece is 1.5% of the GDP of the European economy, big deal. They're going to solve themselves. It was not true. Because we had, and we saw that very quickly, there was a danger, not only the Greek problem, a danger of contagion. French banks, well, Greeks owe the French banks 67 billion euros. They owe the German banks more than 50 billion euros. So if Greece doesn't pay, French bank go bankrupt. France has a problem. Same thing with Germany. Same thing with everyone else. To cut a long story short, what the story told us is that we are all so interconnected now in the European Union that something happening in a corner of the continent affects us all much faster and much bigger than anybody had anticipated. We had not a clue of how fast and how big the problem was. We could discuss about what we did. I mean, we provided funds. We, being the European Union, we provided funds for some countries. Greece being the first one, Ireland being the second, Portugal being the third one. Greece, for example, had twice 109 billion euros, and we're talking, as we speak, about another payment of 130 billion euros. And you might have followed that. The whole debate is saying, okay, I mean, that's exactly what the Germans say, and other Nordic countries say, Germany, Finland, Austria, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, say, right, so I have to work until I'm 67 to allow the Greeks to go on to take their retirement, to have their retirement age at 54, which was partly true. It's a bit hard on the taxpayers to say, I have to make stringent efforts, pay a lot of money to allow people continuing. So that's a perception. And the idea is that, okay, we help you out. It's a mixture between solidarity and co-responsibility. You have to put your house in order. We're going to help you out, but these holidays are nice. It's over. I mean, you have to take decisions. And the whole debate right now is that, aren't we going too far? Aren't we going to be inhuman and break the machine, basically? Because, I mean, and everybody's right in this debate. I mean, on one hand, why should I continue paying whoever? I mean, these, what they call the Club Méditerranée or the Mediterranean Club, why not have to work harder to pay for them, and to pay in many ways, to pay the financing of their debt, to pay my banks who are going bankrupt because they lended too much to Greece. So you have that, and on the other hand, you have to commit yourself to clean your house. And that's what the Greeks are doing right now, and are doing that. I mean, Greece is undergoing a terrible situation. Terrible situation. Once again, the ones who pay for that, it's not the ones who cause the problem. Well, of course, you're all aware of that. But we're talking now retirees who have less than $500 a month in a developed country, $500 a month. All civil servants being cut between 20 and 25% from the salaries. More than 21% joblessness rate. Almost one, you all young, your Greek friends and colleagues, one on two on your age is on the dole, basically. For the European Union as a whole, we have 23 million people on the dole presently. And a large proportion of them young people. This is really the main challenge we are having right now. The main challenge is not coping with the debt and so on and so forth, because we have ample reserves. You're aware of what we've done so far, and we can go in much into details about that. But we set aside a first fund of 440 billion euros, $550 billion. A second one of 400 billion. We are preparing a mega fund of 500 billion euros multiplied by 2 possibly. We have a lot of money. I mean, it's not a matter that the public in Europe is still very, I wouldn't say that we can afford that, we can't afford that, but we have the means to counter that. But you cannot have the means to counter a complete panic. And the main thing that we have been confronted with, actually, especially in 2011, at some point, was a sheer panic. It was not justified by the figures. It has been said by other than me, and I'm quoting Madame Merkel and Mr. Sarkozy and many others, that if you look at the figures, meaning the size of the debts and the percentage of the debt vis-à-vis what you produce, European Union and then even the Eurozone today is better, in a better situation than most developed economies, bar Australia. We have 84%. I'm talking Eurozone, 84% debt GDP ratio. It's not good, but it's infinitely better than some other countries. I don't need to remind everyone here that Japan is 220%. The United States are 89, 90% without counting the state debts. So I mean, the debt here is not a euro problem. It's not a euro as a currency. Actually, the euro is stronger vis-à-vis most other currency compared to 2007. I'm not talking about the Australian dollar. I can tell you, I'm paid in euro. I know what I'm talking about. But vis-à-vis the US dollar, vis-à-vis the pound, we went up 25%. So I mean, the economy remains sound. We can afford, although with difficulties, to fend it off. The main thing is that how can we balance very strict action to avoid having this problem repeating itself every 20 years, and the collapse of the economy. If really you pull the strings too much, the economy will choke and will have major problems to restart. And that's a problem with some countries, and that's a problem with everyone. We could go on, and I see that I've as always, I spoke too much. But a few things. How can we get out of that? Cooperation, and the fact that we have to cooperate better together, and the fact that we have to have a fiscal agreement between us. We cannot have a common currency without having a budget which is more or less in line with each other. I'm ready to give you some details about decisions that have been taken on the 29th of February, meaning 2 days ago. But basically, what it means by that is that now the European Union will have to have communication of the budget of the states before the budget is accepted is voted by the national parliament. And either it will be a blessing and everything will go all right, or the European Union will tell the state, you have to do this and this changes. And it has been applied already to one country, mine. So, I mean, what happened actually in December is that we proposed a new budget to the European Union, and they found out that we had to cut it by 2.5 billion euros, talking three and something billion dollars. And we Belgians and the Dutch and others were a bit the ayatollahs of Europe. You know, we're trying always to be look like the good students. And we found this 2.5 billion euros in a weekend, because we had exactly that time to react with that. Things have changed. Things have changed because countries will have to adapt to that now, willingly or not. There are two ways of seeing things. It's a positive thing, because if we want to have a common currency which is there to stay, we have to have a common and take our responsibilities, and we need the help of others to take it and to make sure that everything is okay. I wouldn't like to give you the impression that everything is imposed, because that's what you read in the press. Everything is imposed by Brussels bureaucracy and telling people what to do and what not to do. It's quite honestly a complete rubbish, to be honest, because it's not the Brussels bureaucracy, it's the governments. And the governments are represented in the Parliament, which plays a role, are represented in the Council of Ministers of the European Union, and we have even a veto. I mean, let's put it clearly. If really it was unbearable, we would veto it. The British vetoed it. Well, not vetoed it, but they chose not to vote a few months ago. So I mean, it is maybe not enough democratic decision. I agree with some parts of it, but this is not imposed by a decision from outer space. It is ours. It is our decision. Sometimes convoluted, let's put it that way, but it remains a democratic decision, and a decision which we all share the responsibility about. So that's the thing. We'll have to put our house in order. We all committed to have what we call now the golden rule, meaning that we are going to put in our fundamental laws, be it the Constitution or other, a guarantee that we will not go beyond a certain amount of debt on a yearly basis. And in theory, it's extremely complicated, because I don't have all the intricacies of that. But we're talking about between 0.5 and 3% a year debt. And the main part of it, the cherry on the cake on that one, is that before, you remember the situation before Maastricht and so on, the 3% and the French and the Germans saying, have a nice day, but anyway, I'm not going to move an inch, is now that the sanctions might be almost automatic. So if for a few years a country says, have a nice day, but I do exactly what I like and I have a huge budget deficit, after 2 or 3 years, they will have to pay as a first in an escrow account, but then possibly as a fine, 0.2% of the GDP. We're talking about billions. We're talking about fights about billions and billions of whatever currency you like. This is a revolution, and we are almost all committed to it, at least the members of the Eurozone and some other members. Consequences for Australia is the same as consequences for the world. The European Union is the largest economic bloc of power, name it as you like. The euro is more or less 20% of the world GDP, of the world production, a bit higher than the United States. It's 530 million people and growing. So I mean, things that affect the United States, things that affect China, will affect Australia. And it might affect Australia in a double way. I mean, first, like everyone else, I mean, loss of markets. Markets are down. I mean, it's obvious. I mean, we are not in an expansion anymore. Some of us are in recession. So that's going to impact on the Australian exports. And in a dual way, directly to Europe and also via China. Export of China to Europe went down 7%. It's huge. I mean, they are the 2 largest trade partners in the world. So of course, if China sells less machines, washing machines to Europe, some of it is made with Australian coal and iron ore and whatnot. that will have an impact directly for your markets in Europe and indirectly via China, via India, via all your partners. I'd like also to add that in Australia, I mean, there are always ways of presenting things. I mean, and Australia has most probably the most secure, the best public finances in the developed world. Most probably, it's almost unbeatable. I can guarantee you that each and any minister of finance in Europe would kill to be in the shoes of Mr. Wayne anytime, I can tell you. On the other hand, Australia has also a huge private debt that should not be overlooked. Australia, as I understand it, has a debt of $1,400 million. 1,400 billion. It's equal to your GDP, and it's a private debt. Private debt in Australia is high, and it's something very interesting. You have, in most Anglo-Saxon countries, you have a public debt which is usually lower than other countries, and a private debt which is higher. And it makes sense. In some European countries, I mean, you pay much more for in taxes and so on, but then you have to pay less, for example, for education, healthcare, and so on and so forth. Whereas in the United States, for example, you get much more money, but you have to pay more for education, you have to pay more for healthcare, and so on and so forth. So I mean, normally in an Anglo-Saxon country, that's something I discovered recently, and I'm not a specialist at that. You have a lower public debt and a higher private debt. Who is owing the private debt of Australia? It's of course the Australian banks, but they refinance themselves on the international market. And you have a lot of European banks, I can tell you, who refinanced the Australian private debt. If the European banks are confronted to major trouble, and for example, they have to raise their level of securities to 9%, well anyway, they have to raise considerably the amount that their capitals, let's say. How are they going to do that? And they have to do that in a very, very short time, by the end of this year, even now, in the middle of this year. Credit will be, international credit will be rising. And one day or another, it will befall on China and it will befall on everyone else. So I mean, you cannot put a firewall between Europe and you, I mean, or anywhere in the world. We are all into it together. Hence, that each and every central bank has been more than concerned about that and have been cooperating with that. Once again, my profuse apologies for being too long, and if, with the permission of the teacher, I'm ready to take the flag.
I think even though we have to end on a rather pessimistic note, because pessimistic and not so pessimistic, because it is a broad problem of debt, which we are all in at the moment, and obviously that calls for other forms of solidarity. I'm sorry to have to cut it short, but I really would like our audience to have the chance to ask you questions. So we'll open the field. Would anybody want to raise something?
Brave enough.
Well, thank you for that very, very interesting presentation. A question about the longevity of the new rules that are being put in place. The rules when the euro was set up were quite strict, as you outlined, of the 3% budget deficit, the 60% of debt. Despite the fact some of the countries that did sign up didn't achieve those to start off with. But as soon as France and Germany breached one of them, they just tore up the rule book. What's to stop France and Germany doing that again?
And precisely the automaticity of it.
We're supposed to be automatic.
Yeah, it is supposed to be, absolutely. It's supposed to be automatic. Now, let's be clear about that. Well, in a nutshell, Commission sees that the country misbehaves big way, not once, but twice or three times. They tell the guys, listen guys, 0.2% of your GDP here in my escrow account, so and so and so, to start with, and have a nice day, thank you very much. If things continue going badly, and we have to take that money as a fine, as a ticket, if I might say, Then it is proposed to the Council of Ministers. Council would be the European Council, let's put it that way. European Council, it's each and every state. Bar one country, the country which is in trouble. So I mean, say you have a Belgian problem, Belgium puts the money, is being judged, if I may say, or considered by all the other members of the Eurozone, bar Belgium, which makes sense. The debate we are having right now is on which majority this decision might be taken. And the debate, to be as precise as I can, is between having a reversed majority of 85%. So 85%, if 85% say nothing, then it's automatic and you pay the fine. Or a qualified majority. Why did we choose 85%? Is that the big countries, France, Germany, and Italy, have 16% of the votes. So never this will be able, that's clever, never that will be able to apply to the big guys, of course. Well, of course, horror, shock and horror, but not exactly surprise. So I mean, this 85%. No, it looks, anyway, if it's not imposed, it will look extremely bad, even in France or in Germany. So the discussions which are taking place actually today is to know what would be, well, one of the discussions is which majority will they need to actually go on this thing. But the idea of the Commission imposing it and the automaticity of the punishment, let's put it that way, is not into question. That's how this thing will materialize and the percentage of the majority inside the European Council.
My question is about the ethical, political, psychological attitude. We all know that in places like Netherlands or Finland, and certainly Germany, people have always had, relatively to some of the other southern European countries, a very ethical approach to paying taxes and to accountability and so forth. We know that in Greece we had a black economy which went up to 38%, and that, of course, fundamentally, now has to change. How quickly that can change, I don't know. But talking to a lot of Greeks in Melbourne, who have all got relatives, in Greece, they're pretty pessimistic about a cultural change in Greece, and that to change the attitude, to change the rules internally, is going to be a very long haul. And they say, it's not going to work, and all you've outlined is fantastic, but Greece is going to have to drop off.
Two things on that one. A, Germany, all these countries you mentioned, you're perfectly right, by the way, but all the countries you mentioned, they depend between 70% on the European Union. More than 70% for Germany of German exports go to the European Union, including Greece. Same for Finland and so on and so forth. It's, of course, a solidarity. It's an ethical question of helping people who are in dire straits and not by their fault. I mean, it's the fault of the governments, for 20 or 30 years. So it's an ethical question. But it's also an interest question. Because if they lose the market, it's important for them. Even the Greek market is important. If the Greeks don't pay back eventually the loans, who is going to pay for that? That will be the German taxpayer, the Finnish taxpayer, who will pay for the Finnish banks who lend to the Greeks. So eventually it's also their interest of everyone. I mean, that Greece repays slowly and doesn't collapse and repays slowly the debts. So that's also self-interest. It's not only an ethical question, as you say, and it's very right. I mean, why do I have to continue paying taxes for these guys who never pay taxes, basically? It's also, quite honestly, a cliche as well. I can tell you, I mean, my country is middle of the range, I mean, reasonably Nordic, but we know a bit about, creative accounting, shall I say. And it doesn't stop there, honestly. But basically, you're right. About the chances of Greece. Greece exports increased last year by 40%, 40. it's hyper tough. I mean, as I told you, half the young Greeks are basically out of job and so on and so forth. It's a terrible situation. But you shouldn't count this country as gone, because they were hit more than others because of the structure. What's the structure of the economy, of the Greek economy? Tourism, shipping, and some others. But basically that's it. And that's it's too bad, but these are the two things which are hardest and quickest hit by a crisis. And these are two things which also will raise the fastest out of the crisis. Secondly, going out of the euro, the Greeks are completely, totally, definitely against that, because they know what's expecting them. Going to go to my sources, Nomura Securities, Japanese, and they know about devaluation, deflation for 10, 20 years. I mean, that's exactly what Japan went through. They say that if Greece goes back to the drachma or whatever it is, get out of the euro, the new currency will devaluate almost automatically by 60%, 60. So you will have a country with a hugely devaluated currency, which will be good for the exports, good for the services and everything. But all the debts they have will remain being in dollars, in euros, in whatever. So you double overnight the debt, the percentage of debt per person. Secondly, because of and it's true for everyone, but even more true in the European Union, how long will this advantage of devaluation will last in Greece? As I said before, how many seconds, literally, before they will have to pay 60% more for the electricity, for the gas, for the petrol, for the cars, for the computers from China, from the iron ore from Australia? 5 seconds? 2? I mean, the economies, especially in Europe, are so integrated that the idea of we're going to devaluate out of the thing will work. Indeed, I mean, if you go to holiday in Greece, the next 2 or 3 months, or maybe the next year, it will be for a pittance, it will be for nothing. But the Greeks will have to pay infinitely more for everything. So, I mean, I'm certainly I for one, but nobody's there to give ideas to the Greeks. But it's very clear for the government and for the Greek people that they're adamantly against leaving the euro. Now, to answer a question you didn't raise, would other countries be comfortable with Greece leaving the euro? That's something I don't know, but I've read that as you did, that indeed some people talk about that, but I don't see legally how a country can be kicked out of the euro, actually.
Right. This room is actually booked by me for a course, so we can go over time a little bit, but not too much. So next shall be Paul. Squeeze in another question if you make it very brief, but we can't do it.
Can I just ask you, being of Greek background and following the news intensely...
You'll be forgiven.
Following the news intensely in Greece, I'm curious, because there's elections coming up.
True.
And you've got the two main parties who are agreeing to what is happening at the moment, but they will probably get less than 50%, maybe even less than 40%. And you have the left wing in Greece, which is vehemently opposed to the austerity measures. So what happens there if the targets, as being set by the European Union in the last round, cannot be met? Is the European Union going to fork out again? Because my sense is that some of those targets will be impossible to be met, and that potentially the EU will need to step in again. How often and how long is the EU happy to keep
it's a $500 billion question, literally.
Clearly, they're at 450 at the moment.
Yes, that's right. The same question can be risen about Italy. Italy is also a bureaucratic, let's say bureaucratic, non-elected, not directly elected government. Same with France. France is having elections in 2 months' time. So, I mean, we all subject to political decisions, political situation. But a decision taken by a previous government binds the country, period. And it's obvious, should I be Greek, I wouldn't vote for these guys. I can tell you, I would vote for anybody else. But quite honestly, look at what happened with Papandreou, the previous prime minister, who went out of Brussels, getting 10 billion euros, and asking for a referendum to see if the Greek people would agree about that, the rules set aside. How long did that last? 2 days? Because, I mean, the the patience, I mean, we are all talking about something which is far, far, far beyond economics. One should never forget that we're talking about money here. And we, Europeans, and especially the Germans, they perfectly well know what happens when money collapses. No need, I don't think, to remember here that if Adolf Hitler came to power, it's a direct consequence of the total collapse of the German currency a few years before. Direct connection. The Germans know it, we know it, everybody knows it. And the level of commitment to the euro by everyone, the Greeks, the Germans, has never been put into question. Now, technically speaking, how are we going to get out of it? I'm the last one to know. I'm confident that we are actually getting out of that. I didn't speak about the role of the European Central Bank and so on and so forth. But there are things happening. European Central Bank is giving now money, if you have some spare time, they're giving away money at 1% if you're a bank, and you can invest that as you like. And we're talking about 1,000 billion euros in 6 months. The European Central Bank cannot be the Reserve Bank of the United States of America. It's not a lender for last resort. We cannot print currency because they have just one mandate: stability. The American Central Bank has stability and employment. We have just stability. But they can lend money to banks, and incidentally, these banks can consider buying national bonds. Maybe. And actually, and I'm sure that behind the scenes is what's happening. You get that money at 1%, but at least X% of that will be spent on Greek bonds or Portuguese and so forth. So,
Last question, brief.
My question will be regarding to, I'm looking at the chart at the moment on the first quarter of 2012, judging in 2011, sorry. The chart mentioned the progress of the productivity in Greece slowing down compared to the GDP that you mentioned.
yeah.
Much to blame on that will be the government, and there's a lot of, I'm actually against the austerity, against the Greece at the moment. My point of view is, should we see a lot of privatization coming into the government sector of the Greece, because that was much blamed for it, and then taking it from the current austerity measure where they're cutting a lot of the spendings on the cuts. It's kind of similar with the Irish position in 2007 where they hold that 10% off the wage increase to get their competitiveness back. Would you see that happening?
It's the same thing and only worse, if I may say, for the Greeks. The main thing is that, yes, they committed to sell big deal, almost everything, all state-owned companies. Incidentally, the largest port in Greece, the Piraeus, the port of Athens, has been bought over by a Chinese company, and so on and so forth. So, I mean, they are selling it. They have no choice. It's part of the deal. They have to sell it. Another part of the deal is to make for everyone actually, to make the labor market more flexible, whatever it means. It means that less protection for the workers, of course, and possibilities of, well, getting rid of workers maybe more easily. Third thing, for example, one of the problems of Greece, Spain, and Italy is in the service sector. It's the fact that a lot of professions are closed shops. Just try to be a taxi driver in Greece, have a nice day. I mean, you have to be Greek from the last 27 generations, basically. But all that, well, and other things. But on 28 professions were closed shops, and they're going to liberalize it entirely. Also, the structure of the state. Greece had, I think, 19 regions. They have 3 now. Or no, the 43 regions, they have 13. So, I mean, they are doing strenuous efforts, huge efforts, but no country, even Kuwait, with all the petrol they have, no one can get out of that in 15 minutes. Time is of the essence. Greece can get out of that, give them the time. If you want Greece to repay everything by tomorrow morning, there's no need even to start. And that's a big problem. I mean, we have to win time, and Greece can get out of that with everybody's help, because it's in Greece's interest, because there are brothers, and because there are markets, and that's because it's our interest as well.
I think we have